VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at VCYAmerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
Well, thank you, Mr. Morris, and good to have you with us on Crosstalk today. This is Friday, of course, and in that we are deeply involved in our days of praise here at VCY America. We are deviating out of our normal days of praise schedule to spend the hour with you. And Friday, of course, is the time during the week that we kind of clear off the top of the desk and make room for whatever's going to happen next week, because there's always something happening, always issues that we need to face. And so today it's kind of end of the week day, and I've got the information that we're going to talk about right in front of me. I must confess that I have never felt as discouraged, frustrated, and yes, I'll confess, righteously indignant, okay, with the stuff that we've been hearing about the military. Now, I'm loyal to my country, but what's happening in recent weeks and months behind the walls of the Pentagon, in the halls of military procedure, and across the world, has me concerned. So many of us saw what happened in Benghazi. And, of course, the big questions that have been asked and never answered. I'll never forget, just recently this week, the president's news secretary irritated and fired back at the reporters who were asking for continuing information about what happened in Benghazi, because they have not been able to talk to some of the people who were there and who survived. And the issue, as this young man fired back at the press, well, this is a long time ago. This is something that, it's really not something to worry about. A long time ago. Now, folks, I'm still waiting for answers, aren't you? About why it was that one of the men in the military, having to cover his identity because he knew that if discovered, he would have sanctions brought against him and possibly lose his standing in the military, but indicated that after the first attack in Benghazi, there was plenty of time for the military to bring in reinforcements. But it never happened. Then, after going back a few more weeks, after hearing, of course, our press secretary say, well, that was a long time ago, okay, let's go back to the source. Who was the Secretary of State then? I mean, that was a cool step there where you suddenly change secretaries of state. Now, Mr. Kerry is in that position, but who was the Secretary of State before Mr. Kerry? None other than Hillary Clinton. And I'll never forget the angry outburst that she placed before the press as she shouted, "What difference does it make? What difference does it make?" Well, ladies and gentlemen, when people die for lack of protection, and then we have people who are ultimately responsible as the Secretary of State shouting back at people of high rank within government and yelling, "What difference does it make?" Folks, I don't know how to describe it, except there's something wrong somewhere. Now, along with the other things that have happened, of course, we have seen what happened in the Boston Marathon. And these young men who, allegedly were carrying out a plot that had spiritual implications. No, I'm not talking about Christianity. This had spiritual implications with Islam. What would make you believe that? Well, when the mother of these two young men was interviewed in Russia, she fired back to the media that she didn't care even if her child was killed, and then shouted out, "Allahu Akbar." Praise to Allah. Now, folks, that brings back the memory of what happened in Fort Hood. A man who was in the military, a man who had connections with Islamic forces and Islamic influence, and ultimately a psychiatrist or psychologist, whatever his rank was, stood there with his armed, his tool of death in his hands, and as he fired the shots one after the other and called out, Allahu Akbar, God is great. Now tell me, when you hear that war cry and realize that it is coming from the Muslim community, whatever you want to say, obviously it would have spiritual implications within that religious sect. That's my belief. Now, I realize that people are trying to use the word radicalization or radicalized in terms that would separate those who are more placid and those who are more angry and vicious. But if you read the doctrines of Islam, you'll find that there are times when you are to be placid and laid back. And then there are times when you are to be like the lion. That's part of the spiritual belief of Islam. Then we run into a situation as this week. A young lady contacted us representing a group of college Republicans to a Christian college known as Wisconsin Lutheran College. Now, it's a normal practice for those clubs to bring in speakers. And after she made this invitation, the word is that they are going to have to change or modify their procedures in bringing in speakers. It was their belief that it was all right to bring in Usama Dakdok to speak at Wisconsin Lutheran College. But for some reason, this young lady who was coordinating the activity as a student, was notified not that there was a breaking of protocol in how you bring in a speaker, but instead was told that Usama Dakdok was a person who was an extremist, and his geopolitical views were objectionable. When this became known, we called the Public Information Office and talked to the gentleman who was in charge of public relations and asked him regarding why it was that this club had been told that Mr. Dakdok was not worthy of coming to speak because of his views and his beliefs. Suddenly we are notified, it wasn't his views and it was belief. It was just protocol as to how he was invited, and we wouldn't mind if he would come back and speak at some other time. Ladies and gentlemen, I have that letter in my hands, in my office. That letter in my office said it so clearly as I read it the other day here on the air. And I have possession of that letter. And it says very clearly that the reason for him being canceled was because, even though he's a Christian minister, his views, his extreme views of Islam, were not acceptable to Wisconsin Lutheran College. Well, enough said about that. Let's take a look at what the big news is here at the end of the week. Most of us were shocked and outraged as an anti-Christian bigot, according to the words of many, had come before the Pentagon and had demanded that any speaking of faith by military would be a violation of military code, that you could not express your faith. And as a Christian, and part of the Christian doctrine, is to tell others about the good things that God has done for you, and to share your love for the Savior, the Son of God. And so they said that you cannot proselyte. Well, proselyting is a word where somebody's badgering someone and trying to force them or bully them into making some kind of a religious claim. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people who have a faith in God. As they go into military, their faith in the Lord is to protect them, to guide them, and make them an example of God's love in the military. But now the outrage was so instant that the Pentagon, even though it's big Bedford stone walls, stood there. The message that came from the public penetrated very quickly. Here's the story from WND News. Bob Unruh writes the story. The Pentagon announced today, now that is just, that was here this week. He announced today that the military members who want to talk about their faith with other members have every right to do so, backtracking on a previous warning against proselyting, which is said that it could lead to court-martial. Now, the statement by Lieutenant Commander Nathan Christensen said that the Department of Defense never and will never single out a particular religious group for persecution or prosecution. That's interesting. Was it not just last week that one of the listed terror groups in the military and official government listings was evangelical Christians who were domestic terrorists? But the military says we will never, ever single out any particular religious group for persecution or prosecution. But one thing they didn't include in that is labeling, or threatening, or restricting. Persecution or prosecution, meaning that they wouldn't physically beat up on them, or they wouldn't take them to court. You see, a court-martial isn't a court proceeding. It's handled as a military procedure. Well, the Pentagon walked back on its statement earlier this week after the Alliance Defend Freedom Fund filed the Freedom of Information Act requesting the records relating to the Pentagon statements on the issue, and members of our military should not be denied the very freedoms they fight to defend. Freedom of religion and speech are paramount among those freedoms, said ADF legal counsel Joseph LaRue. We appreciate the Pentagon's clarification, but little or no evidence exists of coercive proselytizing in the military. So we are still troubled over what motivated the original comments. Now, the Pentagon's Christensen said in the statement today that the Defense Department makes reasonable accommodations for all religions and celebrates the religious diversity of our service members. Service members can share their faith or evangelize, but must not force or unwanted, intrusive attempts to convert others of any faith or no faith to one's belief. So, as a Christian, Jesus said, "Follow me, and I'll make you to become fishers of men." Part of our religious belief is that he that winneth souls is wise. And as Christians, sharing our faith is part of our religious belief and function. So now we have the U.S. military is headed up by radical Christian haters that have come to the place and saying, we've got to stop this witnessing and do something about this. When we come back, I'm going to share some of the phrases that were used to literally intimidate. We'll be right back.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, scientist with the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, how many different types of dinosaurs were there?
Chris, scientists have named about 600 species of dinosaur, but many are quite similar and I think probably could be lumped together into a much lower number of basic kinds. As near as I can determine, there may have been about 50 basic types. Within each type, there's much variety, leading to the larger numbers. Dinosaurs probably started out very robust, living for long periods of time, but the environment changed after Noah's flood and they began to be less and less viable. Now it appears they've all probably gone extinct. To put dinosaurs in their true biblical perspective, we must go back to Genesis for our starting point.
For more information on the foundational principles set forth in Genesis, simply visit us on the web at www.icr.org. That's www.icr.org. For the Institute for Creation Research, I'm Chris O'Brien. Thanks for tuning in.
And welcome back to Crosstalk as we're continuing to talk about what happened here with the military and the issue of warning people not to express your faith, not to say anything. Now, you can have your faith, just don't discuss it, just don't display it. Now, let me just say this, that there are certain things that are displayed with various religions. When you talk about Islam, when they pray 5 times a day, they put their nose on the ground and their posterior hide in the air. It's obvious when you see somebody with their nose on the ground and their backside elevated in the air that there's a demonstration of something that they're doing. When you find Catholics who are responding on something, you'll see them make the sign of the cross, which obviously should be outlawed as well. No Islamic prayers, no religious signs, and certainly any Christian who bows their head to ask God to bless the food as they go through mess hall, you're really deep in trouble because this is against the law. Am I pushing the envelope? I don't think so. Now, the Department of Defense said, or they place a high value on the rights of military members. Yet, Mr. Weinstein, that's Mickey Weinstein of the Military Religion Freedom Organization, that's interesting, reminds me of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which is here in Madison. Interesting names that are very similar. Well, Mr. Weinstein of the Military Religion Freedom Organization met with the department officials and then wrote that Christians in the military are monsters who must be stopped from talking about their faith. Weinstein had declared we face incredibly well-funded gangs of fundamentalist Christian monsters terrorizing their fellow Americans. It goes on, it says, in the interview with Fox News, Weinstein said that the military needs to begin to prosecute Christians who share their faith. Someone needs to be punished for this, he said, until the Air Force, the Army, or the Navy or Marine Corps punishes a member of the military for unconstitutional religious proselytizing and oppression. We will never have the ability to stop this horrible, horrendous, dehumanizing behavior. You know what, folks? It seemed that the military was listening. And after a private meeting between Weinstein and, yes, the Pentagon officials on April 23, a Pentagon spokesman declared religious proselytizing is not permitted within the Department of Defense. You know, it used to be said about people who are in the military, there are no atheists in foxholes. Get out there and hear the bullets whistling over your head, or the explosive or the debris is blown on top of you as you're laying there in the trenches. The earth-shaking explosions and the fear that would be in your heart, realizing that you may not even make it back to camp today. But don't, whatever you do, don't pray. Don't consider God. Don't even share. What if your buddy's hurt? They're in the bunker. And he says, hey, Joe, would you pray for me? I'm hurt. I may die. What do you say? Sorry, sir. The government says I can't pray. Now, folks, this is the kind of ridiculousness. But my question is, as Mr. Weinstein appeared at the Pentagon, who in their right mind would have an individual who, in my opinion, was bigoted and biased against religious liberty, and by the organization he represents, they are outwardly, overtly seeking to annihilate the expression of religious thought? Who in the Pentagon would even legitimize a meeting with this kind of thing? Now, a Christian went in there and wanted to know about setting up a prayer meeting in spare time. I don't know who you'd talk to. Just thought I'd raise the question, folks. The Pentagon has backed up on their statements. The FRC, that's the Family Research Council, launched a petition urging the Pentagon to scrub its plans to censor religious beliefs. And thousands of petitions have already been filed. Well, folks, that's what's happened this past week. And there's more stuff. You know, many of us have heard about Paul Ryan, the man here from Wisconsin, who in Congress is concerned in government, as Paul Ryan has stood for economic policies and seeking to bring our country to some semblance of stability. But what a shock on May 2nd, Janesville, Wisconsin. Paul Ryan, the 2012 Republican vice presidential candidate, announced on Monday that he has changed his position on gay adoptions. He now favors them. Speaking at a town hall meeting in Janesville, Wisconsin, Ryan responded to a question on same-sex marriage with a statement about his reversed position on same-sex adoption. I do believe that if there are children who are orphans who do not have a loving person or couple, I think if a person wants to love and raise a child, they ought to be able to do that, period, said Ryan. I would vote that way, he said. He put it on the table, folks. Here's Paul Ryan, now flip-flops and says he's in favor of supporting gay adoption. Interesting. The Supreme Court in February asserting that homosexuals are as successful at parenting as heterosexuals. And here you have Paul Ryan now filing an amicus brief that the Obama administration filed with the U.S. Supreme Court in February, asserting that homosexuals are successful at parenting equally as heterosexual couples. Thank you, Mr. Paul Ryan. Very interesting. Wisconsin, did you know that? Did you realize that this is going on? And though we're talking about economies, that's one thing. But when you start talking about values, it may surprise you. Providence, Rhode Island. Rhode Island on Thursday became the nation's 10th state to allow gay and lesbian couples to wed as a 16-year effort to extend marriage rights in this heavily Catholic state ended with the triumphant cheers of hundreds of homosexuals and lesbians and their families and their friends. Governor Lincoln Chafee signed the bill into law on the State House steps Thursday evening following a final 56-15 vote in the House. The first weddings will take place August 1st, when the law takes effect. Folks, it's continuing to happen. I heard with my own ears a statement, which is put in print here. Homosexual activist says that gay marriage isn't about equality. It's about destroying marriage. Yes, conservative pundits are saying that a homosexual activist exposed the hidden agenda behind homosexual marriage when she told an audience last year that the movement is not seeking equality, but rather a total dismantling of the institute of marriage itself. Masha Geeson, a journalist and author who campaigns for homosexual rights, made the comments last May in Australia on a panel at Sydney's Writers' Festival. Here's what she said. It's a no-brainer that homosexual activists should have the right to marry. But I also think equally that it's a no-brainer that the institution of marriage should not exist. Fighting for gay marriage generally involves lying about what we are going to do with marriage when we get there. Because we lie that the institution of marriage is not going to change, and that is a lie. The institution of marriage is going to change, and it should change, she said. And again, I don't think it should exist. And I don't like taking part in creating fictions about my life. That's sort of not what I had in mind when I came out 30 years ago. Now, here you have it. Homosexual activists now admitting that the goal is not just to have equality in marriage, it's to destroy marriage. And that is a matter of public record. Parents, look out. The people in your school, the public school that is, and those who support the sexual promiscuity that you find among young people today now have a tool that supposedly takes all the worries away. The FDA made it official on April 30th, saying that the morning after pill known as Plan B should be available without a prescription for teenagers starting at the age of 15. Have you got 15-year-old kids in your house? Does it concern you that this type of thing is being made available? Some pro-life groups have pointed to the comments from the maker of the drug and the studies to show that the morning after pill can act as an abortion agent, in some cases terminating the life of a unique human after conception. Well, there you have it. New toys for teenagers. Lord have mercy. Sales at the age of 15 years old, and you don't have to have a prescription. Well, the big to-do with the Boy Scouts of America, a survey was held. 61% of those who are affiliated with the Boy Scouts of America support current policy of excluding homosexuals. 61%. The survey showed that of the 200,000 adult members who responded, 61% are in favor of keeping the current policy, which excludes open and avowed homosexuals from Boy Scouts of America. 61% of 200,000 people. I'd say that's a pretty good sampling. Yes, even technically reliable. While 34% of this same group of people said they'd like to see the policy changed. Well, it already happened, I think, in the Girl Scout level. That's my understanding. Now what? Well, we're going to move on a little bit further. You know, we've had the situation with the furloughing of air traffic controllers, and you have airports that are being placed under a lot of stress because of the changes by Obama and his move to sequester the operation of our government. Well, we've got an interesting thing we're going to be talking about in just a moment. But would you believe the furloughing of federal employees, of course, meaning they get less money, they'll have to receive less remuneration. Yet the office implementing most of President Obama's health care law is not furloughing any of its workers as a result of sequestering. Gary Cohen, director of the Center for Consumer Information and Insurance Oversight, said Wednesday that his office has not cut its workers' hours and pay as a result of the automatic budget cuts that went into effect in March. Now, the Republicans have accused the Obama administration of politicizing the sequester by targeting highly visible programs like airport security and, yes, White House tours. We'll be right back.
Technology continues to expand the ways we can send and receive audio files, and the Crosstalk program is no exception. The most current way to hear Crosstalk is live at 2 p.m. Central, repeated at 8 p.m. Central on the VCY America network, or on the internet at crosstalkamerica.com or from Shoutcast. There are MP3 files of the most recent programs available at crosstalkamerica.com. But sometimes it makes more sense to have a program on CD to listen again, or to give to a friend or relative, or even to play for a church gathering. Order Crosstalk CDs for a donation of $6 each by calling 1-800-729-9829. Just mention the date or dates of the programs you need. Or mail your request to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208. And again, that phone number for Crosstalk CDs is 1-800-729-9829. That's toll free, 1-800-729-9829.
And we're back with you for a few more moments, and then we're going to open our phone lines. But wanted to just take a few moments to touch base on some of the horrendous things that have been happening here. May the 2nd, days after the release of an undercover video showing an abortion clinic worker urging a patient to flush her baby down the toilet if is born alive. A young woman has been arrested for attempting to do just that. The young lady, 19 years of age, was arrested after a custodian at McCaskey East High School in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, discovered the body of a young baby in the trash can in the ladies' restroom at the school on Tuesday. The teen reportedly first attempted to flush the child down the toilet, but when that didn't work, she deposited the body in a trash can. An autopsy has found that the baby was about 28 weeks gestation, well past the point of viability, and police have not yet determined whether the child was stillborn or alive at birth. We can not always determine if there was a heartbeat at the time, said the coroner. Surveillance footage at the school allowed police to track down this young lady as the suspect. The teen has been charged with concealing the death of a child. Well, folks, young people not trained in what's right and what's wrong and what's honest and what's sinful, parents expecting kids to grow up like a weed, not even discussing what's right and what's wrong, and you wonder why, on the altar of convenience, you have a young woman like this that would endeavor to hide her sin. Well, it's as bad with the abortionists, because back in the late 80s, early 90s, right here in our city, we became aware that one of the abortion organizations had gone to their landlord and had filed for oversized, large abortion, well, they call them garbage disposal units, that would be used for obvious purposes. Thankfully, the landlord did not comply. And so the abortion industry in our town then went to the place of sending the little fetuses, the little babies' bodies, in containers up to a pet cemetery, who cremated these babies along with the fuzzy carcasses of cats and dogs. America, we weep for you. Big question. Our representatives are challenging the Department of Homeland Security regarding ammunition buys. I'm talking about buying bullets. They say that the agency is using and purchasing 1,000 more rounds per person than the Army. Now, when you're in the Army, of course, there's practice with your weapon and target practicing and marksmanship and all of the things involved, and you have a number of cartridges that you use, and probably they may be in the hundreds. But would you believe that the Department of Homeland Security, I'm talking about America, Homeland Security, has bought 1,000 more rounds per military person than in the Army? Republican Representative Jason Chavez said that Thursday that the Department of Homeland Security is using roughly 1,000 rounds of ammunition more per person than the U.S. Army, as he and other lawmakers sharply questioned the Department of Homeland Security officials on their massive bullet buy. Folks, we haven't heard the answer yet as to why, but certainly a good reason to ask questions along that line. Now, getting back to the abortion doctors that are doing this grisly trade, Robert Alexander's abortion clinic was shut down in December by the city of Muskegon, Michigan, after unsafe and unsanitary conditions were found. Now, state officials are wondering why the state medical board has not terminated Mr. Alexander's medical license. The state legislature had planned to hold a hearing on Tuesday on Alexander, and a Muskegon OB-GYN was expected to testify at the hearing, but instead the doctor wrote that Alexander should have his license revoked. The doctor walked talked about one case in particular as a reason why, saying that Alexander botched an abortion in a woman in her second trimester. Dr. Alexander perforated the woman's uterus so badly that it was hanging on by 2 blood vessels, he wrote. The decapitated head of a baby was in the woman's abdomen, and the large intestine had been grasped and pulled away from its blood supply. The woman required a hysterectomy. He said, I, for one, was very happy to hear that he is no longer practicing medicine in Muskegon, but I fear for women anywhere this man would go. Well, may I say this, folks? There's more than Robert Alexander, according to what we're reading today. There are people like Kermit Gosnell, a man you've been hearing about so much. And the fact is that the public media had kept the story suppressed for a long time, and we're still waiting to find the details of what's going to happen to this man who would decapitate, who would amputate body parts from these little children and keep them in glass jars on his desk or in the cabinet as a trophy of his grisly trade. Abortion. How can God withhold his hand of judgment upon our nation? Well, I've talked about as much as I care to here today. Right now, just one encouraging word that South Carolina has indicated that, well, let's put it this way. South Carolina State House passed a bill Wednesday that declares that President Obama's patient protection and affordable care, better known as Obamacare, to be null and void and criminalizes its implementation. The state's Freedom of Health Care Protection Act intends to prohibit certain individuals from enforcing or attempting to enforce such unconstitutional laws and to establish criminal penalties and civil liability for violating this article. Well, that's interesting. Folks, we are in serious trouble, and we need to pray for our country. We need to take stands as individuals. The church needs to uphold righteousness. And when you see wickedness being involved in your city, you don't sit and just wring your hands, but as a godly man or woman, simply raise your voice and say, this is wrong. The Bible tells us to abhor that which is evil and to cleave to that which is good. My sad observation is that there are people who see the evil but don't abhor it. They ignore it instead. Enough of my chatter. We're going to open our phone lines right now. If you'd like to call in, our telephone number is 800-733-9829. 800-733-9829. Maybe these or other stories that you'd like to discuss today. Our telephone number again, 800-733-9829. Welcome your calls as we kind of come to the end of a week. There's more stuff in my pile here than we could handle in 3 hours. But thought we would just open the lines here and hear the heart of our listeners all across the network. I want to say thank you to each and every station that carries this broadcast. And I want you to know, folks, that they are providing free airtime for us to broadcast because they believe that this information is vital and needs to be out there. So I want to, number one, ask you to support your station wherever it is. If you're a listener to a VCY-owned station, your support is appreciated. But there are many stations that are not owned by VCY America. And I want you to you're encouraged to support them, call their managers, thank them for carrying Crosstalk, because we're here to provide vital information. We're going to go to the phones right now, and we're going to talk with Mark, who is in Kansas. And Mark, you're on the air.
Yeah, hi, Vic. I'm opposed to abortion. I think it's a Holocaust. But you mentioned a story about 15-year-old girls that can get a morning after pill to stop pregnancy. Mm-hmm. And I guess the questions that I would have would be questions that I don't think have been addressed yet by the law that will allow that. If a 15-year-old girl can get an abortion pill to stop a pregnancy, then she's obviously pregnant, and that 15-year-old is underage. So that underage girl could possibly have had an adult man that had impregnated her,
That's
or
right.
someone that was an adult where she is a child. And there would be laws where that man would do prison time for having sex with someone underage. Is that being considered? And then I have one other question.
Let me tell you, it is considered because there is video that is available done under cover of people going to a Planned Parenthood clinic. A young lady going there. She was just an actor. She was not pregnant, but she discussed the fact of the possibility that she had a boyfriend that was older and who would have been involved in causing a pregnancy. And the people at that clinic said, don't tell us who he is or don't tell us his age. So when you have this kind of complexity and complicity in the industry, what can you imagine?
Well, and the thing is if she's underage, there could be statutory rape situations, and that would need to be there needs to be prison time for that. So that's ridiculous. The other thing is, if a 15-year-old girl can go in and get a pregnancy pill to stop a pregnancy, an abortion pill, morning after pill, then what's to keep her, since she doesn't have to have a prescription, from buying that for her 12-year-old, 13-year-old, 14-year-old sister? In other words, the idea that 15 is by law the legal age, without a prescription, a girl could go in and buy those things and give them to anybody she wants.
Mark, you're absolutely right. Thanks for raising that question. Appreciate that so much. Got to move along quickly. Mobile, Alabama, and James online. James, you're on the air.
Hey.
You're on the air.
Yeah, I got my radio turned off. I got a question. If they make laws against Christianity in America, why do they make laws against not being a Muslim in places like Saudi Arabia? If you're not a Muslim over there, they just beat you to death.
Right.
And a lot of people don't know that. But I mean, that's the law. They claim they're 100% Muslim over there. They got reason to believe it.
Well, the book, the Quran, tells you that if you encounter infidels, you're to kill them.
Yes, that's exactly right. And if you're a Christian, they're going. I mean, you like an addiction. They're going to eliminate you in a hurry.
I received an email this week, which was quite interesting, James, and it was a man who was involved. He came to hear a presentation by an Islamic imam who made his presentation of all the glorious things of Islam. And then this individual stood to his feet and asked a simple question and said that if you read in your book about infidels, can you tell me who an infidel is? And the man, the Islamic, said, well, an infidel is an unbeliever. He said, well, that means I'm an unbeliever, right? And I'd be an infidel? And the man said, yes. And your book, the Quran, says to kill the infidels, right? And the man hung his head, according to this story. We'll be back in 60 seconds.
Weekend.com. We're continuing our series on a biblical worldview and money, 20 points. We're on point number 8 today. A wise man does not trust in riches. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 17 speaks to this. Now, as we've explained, there's nothing wrong with money or having money. It's really neutral. It's not money that's the root of all evil. It's the love of money. And we don't place our trust in our money. We place our trust in the Lord Jesus Christ alone. Number 9. A wise man understands that real money is gold and silver, and God owns it all. Haggai 2, verse 8 speaks to this. A wise man understands that real money is something that has intrinsic value, not a fiat paper currency that can be inflated at the whim of the politicians and the central bankers. So a godly man or a wise man understands what is of real value, what's a real hard asset, and they have diversification. The Bible speaks to that as well. We'll continue on our next program.
And welcome back to Crosstalk. Right now we're going to go up north, up on near Lake Superior, Port Wing. And Tom, you're on the air. Go right ahead, Tom.
Oh, thank you very much, Vic. Here's my question about this morning after pill. The American Academy of Pediatrics came out and they gave the okay on this. And I would like to know what kind of studies they did. Where can we find those studies? And how many 12-year-old girls did they try this stuff out on? Because, Vic, I have a clear memory of what happened with the drug called thalidomide.
Yes.
And the repercussions from that. I have a friend who received medications from doctors that dissolved the joints in his body, and he's very crippled now. They didn't understand then, and this was FDA-approved also medication. Where are these studies? And it's shameful that the American Academy of Pediatrics went along with this program. They should all be held responsible for the first child that is damaged from this terrible drug.
Let me just say this, Tom. It's important that people like you take that opportunity to do the research and demand to know. And find out, call them right on the phone, contact them through mail, and say, we'd like to know the authority. We'd like to have the full details about how this was, what was the research behind it. Mm-hmm. Is it documented? Where can I find it? You see, some kid's going to die as physical implications and complications of a situation like that. And the question is, was this thing really checked out or not?
Yes, that's the terrible thing, Vic. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. In Port Wing, Wisconsin, we're going to go to Alan on the road in Wisconsin. Alan, you're on the air.
Hi there, Vic. How are you doing?
Fine, sir.
The two things that are infuriating me, and I use this broadly, is our vermin government people that we've elected, and they're not all bad. They're not all bad, but it seems like a majority of them are, and they're more and more evil. With the abortion issue and with a homosexual issue, this is all okay. This type of behavior is just perfectly fine, and it's all okay. And it's making my blood boil, and I will no way embrace, condone, praise, or glorify this homosexual lifestyle. You want fellowship, that's fine. Then you have to repent of your sin, and there is deliverance from this sin of homosexuality. And I've heard a number of people on your programs that were homosexuals and changed their hearts. These people just don't want to change. They want to continually do evil. And then the other issue is this thing with buying all these bullets. What do they need? 1 billion, 2 billion? Was it 2 billion PowerPoint bullets? That's for killing people. That's not for target practice. And I don't own a gun, and our Lord tells us that those who live by the sword will die by the sword. But if I have to, I'm going to buy a gun, and I'm going to protect my wife and my family unless the Lord so chooses to either take me in the rapture or some other way, because something's got to happen, Dick. Something is going on. You can just sense it. Some dynamic has to change. We can't keep going the way we are. Everybody's praising the stock market. It's going sky high. There's a big fall coming, I think, a real big fall, and I just hope that as believers we're not here to see it.
Thank you very much, Alan, on the road in Wisconsin. Appreciate your call. We're going to we have an open line or two here, 800-733-9829. Just minutes before we have to leave you, we're going to go to Colleen in Menominee Falls. And Colleen, you're on the air.
Hi, Vic. This isn't my main point, but you're so negative. I mean, people tell me I'm negative, too. I mean, how do you say something positive about this stuff? Well, God wants it that way, apparently. No, He doesn't. He gives us a choice. He puts us here to do something like Esther. I just look at these horrible things, this homosexuals adopting children. How could they possibly teach them right from wrong? Colleen, cannot possibly teach them right from wrong.
Colleen, I want to add the comments because you're talking about Mr. Paul Ryan's move to approve the adoption and voted or went online with that bill. And may I say this, just because someone is economically very sharp on the subject of the economy does not mean that every other area of their character or their values fall in line with conservative, much more, even common sense or spiritually worthwhile values. Any man that can, we need an economy.
Back to Tommy Thompson.
Yeah.
Not a real conservative, just whatever is going to work to get higher in the Republicans. I'm very disappointed.
Thank you, Colleen. We're short on time, so we'll have to take it there, but we're going to get one more call here, and Mike in Bayview, you're on the air, Mike.
Yeah, Vic, that first caller you had that was talking about the young women, my wife and I ministered on at Planned Parenthood, and I cannot tell you the young girls, 13, 14, 15 years old, that are being dragged in there kicking and screaming to get an abortion by somebody that's in their 60s. And it's just, God have mercy on this nation, I'll tell you. In that morning after pill, there's people in our group know that the girls are bleeding and possibly bleeding out from that pill, and they're going to keep it all quiet. We all know that.
My question, Mike, is there are sins of omission, there are sins of commission. And if law enforcement, understanding the possibility of molestation of children, cannot put an observation point outside of these abortion clinics where there are high questions that are being raised every day by the people that patronize those institutions and can go blind-eye, turn their back, and simply wait for the 911 call, when if they'd open their eyes, they would see it with their own eyes.
That's right, Vic. You got it. You nailed it right on the head. I'll tell you, it happens, and it happens weekly. So God bless you guys for putting out the word, and what more can I say? God have mercy on our nation.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate the call. Well, this is the end of our program today. Thanks for putting up with all the details. And I want to say thank you to all the folk who are with us for the remaining hours today, our last day of praise, our share-a-thon for VCY America. And if you're listening to a station that is not owned and operated by VCY America, stand behind your station, support them, and let them know you appreciate Crosstalk. God bless you. Have a blessed day. And have a blessed weekend as you serve the Lord.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208. Or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.